Hello, this is Sergio Morero, and we're here with Rebel1 Live with the CEO of Culture Shift Lab, Andrea Hoffman. So thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, of course. And I know. Thank you for making an exception, Andrea. Isn't usually in front of the camera. She's usually orchestrating communities and bringing them together. And glad you joined us today to share a little bit more about her background. She's a co-author of $50 Billion Boss, a book that talks about young women entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs of color, African American women entrepreneurs. She's also on the a council member on the Advancing Black Pathways Advisory Board, along with the great work she does for Culture Shifting Labs and Culture Shifting Weekend. And I'm sure there's much more, but I'll just give a snippet. So thank you for sharing your time with us this evening.
Yeah, I'm excited to chat with you, and there's no better time than to share your story and some insights and successes than now. I think people need to hear all of these, bright spots. So I hope to share some of that.
Great. Well, diving in, can you share a little bit more with the audience on what is Culture Shift Labs?
Sure. We call ourselves a diversity and innovation consulting firm. And we do that because part of the work that we do has to help leaders that are P&L owners understand their role in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so if you're never talking about that part of this work, usually those leaders check out. And so we help them look through the P&L lens, the profit and diversity, but in ways that improve business and society. So diversity and innovation consulting firm. And we tailor all of our engagements based on what the client needs. But we have three pillars that we provide services under: advising, strategy, and activation. And you said earlier that, I don't like to be on camera. I'm a behind the scenes person. So one of the things that I do is I act as a confidential, which is there's a reason for that, confidential advisor to CEOs, millionaires, billionaires, and leaders. And so that's part of our advisory work. And our magic formula is called knowledge and network. One without the other falls flat in this work. So we wake up every day to drive tangible results, tangible outcomes, tangible change. And so you can't have the knowledge of this work and what needs to happen and all of the opportunities without the network. And we've built the nation's largest database of Black subject matter experts in order for companies to activate on their strategies.
That's great. Giving color to the work. And when do companies usually engage with you?
Yeah. Some are proactive, some are reactive. So some want, an assessment. Some want retained search. Some want experiential, immersive experiences. So our think tanks and innovation labs where they get to meet talent, diverse talent pipeline development. So it really depends. And our clients are across the board. Their CEOs, their chairman, their chief human resource officers, managing partners. So it's a mix of people that bring us on. And sometimes, people are in trouble, something happened, and they recognize it's an opportunity to do better and to do things the right way. But typically speaking, our clients have been more, proactive. It's just they get right to the edge of the cliff, and, maybe they're about to have an issue or it's been bubbling up where, there's like a rising up of the staff and they are demanding, change, but not an issue hasn't happened. So, but it's a mix why we get called.
And can you share also, I know that Culture Shift Labs is one part of your business, and Culture Shifting Weekend is where I met you.
Mhm.
And for those watching, I know there's a number of venture capitalists or an aspiring venture capitalists and also founders on the live stream that usually watch Rebel1 Live that would probably engage in a culture shifting weekend. Can you share more of what is Culture Shifting Weekend and how it came about?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. It's an interesting story how it came about. So it used to be called something else. And that was 11 years ago. It's 11 years old in New York, which is where it started. And it was born out of a book that I wrote 11, 12 years ago called Black is the New Green. It was about when I used to be a business to consumer consultant. I was a target marketing strategist and I help companies find new markets, new business opportunities, and co-wrote this book. And it was really a brunch to celebrate people that were under the radar. So, hidden figures, we didn't use that term at the time. And it was to bring upscale brands together with these people that, were under the radar, and, vast rooms of people that were affluent and influential. And it morphed it's probably about 4 years ago, morphed in New York to be the largest gathering of Black and Latinx venture capitalists to address the inequality there. And then we scaled it to Silicon Valley. This is the 6th year, and I've been out there for 7.5 years. And that's the largest gathering of Black leaders in innovation, technology, and social impact. And the whole purpose of it is to enable deals and collaborations. My partner, Denmark West, and I always say that no one needs one more event for education, inspiration, and networking as much as they need outcomes, right? Checks. That's why we jokingly use the phrase, write big checks. So we decided that we want to constantly refine our ability to enable deals and collaborations, success and wealth creation for the Black and Latinx Hispanic communities. So that's what it is. Slightly different themes in both markets. And we're actually expanding to Miami in 2021, thanks to a grant from the Knight Foundation.
That's amazing. I mean, I remember going, it was my first time going last year, went in New York. It was at Salesforce, and it was really inspiring to see. I mean, and what's interesting is, what is it, that there's a lot of familiar faces, right? Because the world of Black and Latinx VC venture capitalists is small, and aim to make it bigger. But yeah, I think it being an event connecting emerging GPs with prospective limited partners, that's definitely needed, and a powerful was a powerful and inspiring experience for sure. So
I'm glad to hear that your first experience was a good one. We aim for that, and we aim to measure our success based on who got checks. So but I have a quick question for you.
sure.
How big do you think the universe is of Black and Hispanic venture capitalists? If you were going to throw out a number, 50 firms founded.
That's a good question. I should know this. I do not. I don't know
Yes.
I think of number first. I think of number of people. My guess would. I mean, I guess of the list I have, something around, like 300 or so Black and Latinx GP-ish. In terms of number of firms, you mean number of firms founded by, or number of firms where? Oh,
Founded by.
founded by. I don't know. That I put at maybe I don't know, 30 maybe. I don't know.
No, I love asking that question
It's a
because
good question.
yeah, so it's closer to 300.
Okay, really? Okay. Wow. That's
Yeah.
amazing. Okay.
Just a
Okay.
little factoid, because we've been building this list. I actually started with a blank piece of paper, did not really know the industry. My partner, Denmark West, is a venture capitalist, and I've kind of danced around it. And I know, working with Robert Smith and the work that he does, just being friends, and, knew about private equity, but I didn't know this world. And we put together the largest database of, and we consistently, update it. So it's about 300.
Got it. And that's 300 venture capital, not PE, right?
Right. And venture capital founders.
Got it. Venture capital founders.
The universe of, partners or
Yes.
associates, that's much bigger.
Yeah. Got it.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, that's great. That's great. And I mean, and we've interviewed, we've been trying to interview as many investors of color and women as possible to highlight those stories.
Yeah.
So can work with you on figuring out who the other people are who we haven't tapped those stories.
Yeah, there's some interesting people that aren't really on anybody's radar, but yeah.
No, I mean, especially I think it was amazing. when we went. I mean, one of the stories, and I hadn't heard, of him was African American who raised a fund around material science. It was over $100 million.
Oh, at our event when you,
Yeah,
Carmichael?
yeah, Carmichael. Yep, yep. That and that was when it's fascinating how he talked about how he started that fund, why he started that fund. You could see the pattern of he had expertise in the space and it was very specific,
Right.
in terms of his thesis around material science,
Hmm.
and not a lot of people, like some people knew who he was and some people just hadn't, because some of these people just their heads down doing good work.
Yeah.
It's important to highlight the stories to inspire the next generation for sure.
Definitely.
Um, Speaking of it, inspiring inspiring stories, can you share a little bit more of what inspired you to start this work 13 plus years ago?
Whew, so I started the company around 2004. It took some twists and turns, but I've been a serial entrepreneur since high school. That's a funny story that maybe I'll touch on later, or maybe I'll touch on another time. But um, so I remember sitting in corporate and so as I mentioned, I was a business to consumer target marketing strategist, and the client had asked, well, we need to. Yankelovic came in and presented data on the new demographics. And as a company, as an agency, I was on the agency side, our client wanted to increase market share and they wanted to find new customers. And when Yankelovic left, they weren't jumping up and down and doing backflips like, oh my God, these are the consumers of the future. And they were non-white, and I remember just watching how things played out between my boss at the agency and the client, and it was just odd. And I'm a very practical, I'm a very, I use common sense a lot. Um, and I just wondered why this was being lost on everybody, what the deal was. And, I became an expert at multicultural marketing. I became a deep expert in the Black consumer, specifically affluent, because I was working for a luxury brand. And I just found, new audiences on top of new audiences on top of new. So I just entered into this world that was what I usually refer to as magical, eye opening. Any brand would want to get access, and they just weren't, you know, as excited as I was. And so I fell more in love with the work. My personal network was very diverse. And so this was just very logical to me for a number of reasons. And I decided that I really didn't want any part of an organization that had power, money, and resources and access and was abusing it, not doing anything with it. So I decided to go out on my own, but it was really by accident because I was waiting to make my next move to find the right fit. I didn't necessarily want to be a full-time entrepreneur. It wasn't something that I was being deliberate about. I mean, I knew I was entrepreneurial and I had entrepreneurial endeavors and side hustles, but it was by accident. And, fast forward, it was like, okay, now you have to do this for real. And it wasn't easy. It was very hard. And most years in the business, I did not do well financially, just getting by or living off credit cards. And then it hits, right? That idea of overnight success is like, yeah, 10 years later, and what's the real story? But was so in love with the work that I wasn't always thinking about the money. It was more about convincing people to, you know, see things that they weren't seeing. And one of my superpowers is to see through, around corners and through walls. I did not know I had that superpower until, several years ago. But yeah, so it was completely by accident. And then, I was like, well, I'm unemployable at this point. I don't think I can work for anybody else. And they build something for us. Whatever your magic is, we're behind it. We'll give you a blank check. If that's the case, then sign me up. But otherwise, I like what I do. I like creating something from nothing, and I like pioneering things. And it's really exciting to see things other people don't. And I'm not driven by the check. I'm driven by the impact.
I think that's powerful. Going to a few things that you said is, that like being driven by the impact is one, but also working backwards is you don't really know. It's like you do have a vision for something you want to create, but at the same time being open to what, it may morph into something you don't expect. And then also
Yeah.
that, yeah, good.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, surgery, there was a time when I remember calling one of my mentors. It was a painful time because I said, I feel like an artist that doesn't have a paintbrush and a canvas. I'm so I've lost my vision, I've lost my creativity, and it became, and I don't remember if it was because there were financial challenges or because people were saying you have to be money driven instead of mission driven. There were a lot of different twists and turns in my life and my career, but I just remember feeling like, this artist who the only thing they live for and love is to paint, and somebody took away my paintbrushes and my paint and my canvas, and I was just lost. And I couldn't see anything. And oftentimes, again, I didn't know this until several years ago, but when people talk to me and I'm having a conversation, brainstorming or anything, I actually can formulate colors and pictures and stories in my head. As they're talking, it's like this whole world gets created, and I could see things and I make things in my head and then I do it. And when somebody takes that away from you, it's a really dark place. And then it came back, and I don't remember exactly how, but I think probably the lesson is, just stick with it, right? It's like what's the best way to get through hell is to like keep going. Otherwise, you're like going back into the burning house to figure out how to get through the burning house. It's like if you're going through hell, just keep going to get to the other side.
Yeah, I love it because it's, especially as a, like you said, the overnight success is never overnight. And it's a, it comes after building your craft for a long time, and then there are ups and downs, and things,
Yeah.
things go astray.
Yeah, and people, there's a saying that I heard. I want to say T. Duckett from Chase posted it. I don't know if it was her words or she took it somewhere else, but people see the glory, but they don't know the story.
Hmm.
Like, oh, they must,
Yep.
she must have been born with a silver spoon, or oh, there's so many different narratives out there about people, but also about me, and it's you got to put in the work. I personally was not born with a silver spoon or access or knowledge of this industry or industries I got into. You learn by doing, and making mistakes and sticking with it.
Can you share more? Speaking of, how life experience shapes you and sticking with it, like takes a lot of audacity to do that.
Mhm.
And you've been such a strong advocate for communities of color and the Black community, and you're a white woman in that space. Like, can you share more about um, you know, what is it that drove you to do that, and
Yeah,
keeps that going?
yeah, yeah. I've been dedicated to success and wealth creation for the Black community since 1999. I dedicated my life to that when, that story I told you, working on the agency, and I was just so incensed, and, just fell in love with the work, and friendships that I built, and it just kept getting more and more, deeper into the community. And I think that, you know, there's a couple of ways I want to answer this, and part of it is my ancestry, and part of it is just opportunity. But um, you know, a lot of people are raised or born into families that say, dictate what they're going to do. You're going to be an accountant, you're going to be a doctor. And so I was always I came out of the womb as an independent thinker. So my parents had a really fun time with me, not. And I just marched to my own beat. And so, I I just, see the world differently, and I always did. And um, I was just uh, I just had an opportunity to do work on the agency side that led me to an opportunity showing up, and I listened to my intuition. This is interesting. I didn't even think that this is a business. I think like that because it was so long ago. It was just like, I love this. And then the more I got into it, I was like, oh my God, and I love this and I love that. It's like a kid in a candy store. And I kept meeting people that were fascinating, and their stories weren't told or captured in history books, and just navigated this whole world. To me, that was like a Disney World, right? It's like an immigrant coming from another country going to Disney World for the first time. Like, oh my God, this is just fascinating. But, you know, from a history standpoint, my family history, I'm Jewish, and my, people were marched into ovens by a crazy dictator, right? And burned alive. And so anything that's around abuse, of people, not just even disregard, that's another part of it, but just any sort of abuse of people, of earthlings, just drives me crazy. And some of that is the DNA. And my mother tells me an interesting story, that aside. And that's really in my, at a cellular level, right? My grandmother in the 1920s was a member of a Black church in Harlem. And she had befriended a woman, and that woman just invited her to her church. And my grandmother would, go to the church, and she was from Poland, and, was not, racist or anything like that. And so I just think back to my family, and how I come by this work naturally.
That's no. Thank you for sharing that. Gives insight into what moves you to do that, because it takes a lot. And speaking of, when I hear things that, I mean, I'm sure we're similar in that way. The default to action, that entrepreneur, is like once you see something that moves you emotionally, you move to fix it, in some aspect, and you have with a lot of what you've built. Can
Yeah, and
you?
some people are social justice activists, as a result, or civil rights or whatever. I'm a businesswoman, and but I also am very mission and purpose driven at the same time.
Yeah, and from the work you've done with companies, and shifting on the culture shift lab side,
Yeah.
first, what are what are companies that are really responding well to the call of systemic racism in the system, and what are they doing that makes them stand out?
Yeah, well, first, I'm a little bit biased. I was, when you and I were prepping for this call, I told you that, and I'll say it again. But, JP Morgan Chase is really putting in the work. This work around systemic change for diversity, equity, and inclusion, racial diversity, all of that. It's not easy. It's very nuanced. It's a long tail approach that you've got to take. You've got to commit to the time, money, and resources, and right people on the playing field. But Jamie Dimon was doing a lot of work before this was a thing, before it was a public narrative and public commitments, and pre George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and others who unfortunately and painfully lost their lives. And so JP Morgan Chase is really putting in the work. There's an article that I wrote on LinkedIn around the work that their Advancing Black Pathways was inspired by the work that they were doing with veterans for many years. And they don't tell that part of the story, right? So it's very interesting. So I'd say JP Morgan Chase is really putting in the work. And then, recently one of my consultants put together a list of all the companies that made public commitments, right, around at this moment. And it was really fascinating to see the narrative. And what we assessed and what we're, anticipating is that there's a lot of companies that saw this as an important pivotal moment in our history, one that will go down in the history books, a page in the history books. And I think we're trying to figure out, and they're trying to figure out what systemic change looks like. So we tracked, I think it was almost 70 companies, but that's not everybody. There's a lot of foundations doubling down and pivoting and all of that. But, big commitments. Bank of America made $1 billion commitment. PayPal, I think, was the second largest, 530 million. Foot Locker was like 400 million. Or Pepsi, I forget which is which. One made a 300 million, Pepsi made another. Google made 174 million. Some of the argument is like, really, that's not enough. What we're really aiming for is systemic change. This needs to be every year. This shouldn't be, we're doing this for the next 100 years, buzz off, we're good because we made a commitment. This is, you really have to talk to these leaders about systemic change. And what we're noticing is that we're not quite sure that the companies who made the commitments have the right teams, the right process and are have that systemic change, but they're asking questions. And my message to all of the CEOs out there is this cannot be a one and done. Systemic change is critical, and they have the opportunity to get it right if they choose to.
Yeah, and that's great. That it's like figuring out. I think it really takes that leadership to go to that next level because
Yeah.
I think there were a lot of companies that came out in the beginning. They're like, oh, we're gonna, they'll put out a statement, but um, I would say in the startup space, we talk about you either hire, you wire, right? Send the money
Yeah.
or hire.
Wasn't it Sarah Kunst or was it Monique Woodard that said that? It was like,
I think Monique Woodard on the Black VC call, which I loved. I mean, that was great. Like she's just, she I what I really liked is what she called out. She said everybody's trying to make themselves. They're opening up more office hours for founders of color. She's like, that's nice, but realize that's only for your ego, so you feel better that you're doing something. And she addressed that, and I was like, that's eloquent and direct, right? It's a,
yeah,
it's a step in the direction, but it's, like you said, then you do it after a couple times, and then it's not the topic of the time. Is this a consistent systemic change?
yeah, it really has to be. And, I don't want to call anybody out and just say, you're bad and you're a bad person and you've got it all wrong and just go, it, you, a lot of people need the education and they need the safe space and the courageous conversations. But I was talking to one of my favorite people the other day, Caretha Coleman, who's married to Ken Coleman, and they're legends in Silicon Valley and amazing, impactful people. And it's not even just the courageous conversations. It is, what is your implementation plan and your metrics around this? And the truth is, leaders are calling each other. They're calling Darren Walker at the Ford Foundation. They are trying to figure it out, and we don't want to squander a crisis, and we don't want to squander an opportunity. And so there's a lot of leaders getting together soon. I shared with you we're doing a convening gathering of leaders. It's off the record, and talking about systemic change. And you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I mean, there's 70 companies that made public commitments, but we also are getting calls from companies that are making private commitments. And so not everything is public and a big to do. Some companies don't believe in that. And the hope is that this crisis will lead to a not just a mission, but a movement that leads to systemic change.
And and even something as simple, I think one of the simple things was having a conversation with uh, other group of investors is just the reporting, just saying even if you don't have any benchmarks, right, of how you're going
Yeah,
to change anything, just transparency, I think forces people
yeah,
to like you said, the metrics you measure, you reflect, and you come up with what is appropriate for you. But at least you're open about it. I aim more on that side, but again, that's my opinion. So, for sure.
yeah, yeah. But don't just call people out. Hey, you should do this. Show them how it can be done. What are the platforms? What are the technologies? What are the tools? What's the roadmap? I mean, at Culture Shift Labs, just a plug, but also, I said earlier when I got on the call, I don't like to be on camera and these kinds of interviews, but my advisory board has said, listen, we're doing CEOs a disservice by not letting them know we're out there, we're solving problems, and we're creating frameworks. And we are. I mean, we have a roadmap here where, systemic change requires a process and the right people around the table. And we develop those for companies. Most know about our public stuff, which is our convenings and our events. But the majority of our work, Culture Shift Labs, is all about the advising that we do, the frameworks that we create, the systems that we create for companies, and then the networks that we bring them to for this systemic change. So you've got to systematize this work if you want to get it right. And that's what's exciting about this moment is raise your profile, raise your voice, and be willing to have conversations and hold people accountable.
And for your work in the venture community with culture shifting weekend. Can
Yeah,
you share, so just some of the metrics that are really impressive around
yeah.
what the capital you've helped, convene to date, and what some of your goals
Sure.
are?
Yeah, so the New York event now going on its fourth year with this theme. I told you it was 11 years in general and 4 years that we decided on this theme. Every year we try and get, more and more perfect in our desire to have outcomes. So far in the last 3 years, we've been able to have about $150 million to get invested into, VCs to show up. And that's not like, oh, 300
Woo!
VCs got a dollar each. This is probably about 15 people got the 150 million, or maybe 20 people. And so the way
Amazing.
that we design it, we're always trying to be very, very thoughtful. Who meets who and who's in the room, and we don't want to water it down. We don't have a lot of like service providers, unless they're a sponsor, because this is really about GPs and LPs meeting, and then the content and the conversations, are just to inspire people and educate. And but it's really about who got a check, and this year it's going virtual. But when Denmark and I were talking about the design, and we have an incredible planning committee, Dustin Shea from Village Capital, Vernon Lee from the Marathon Fund, William Crowder, who used to be at Comcast, and some others, and of course Denmark, and Caretha Coleman. We're like, the programming is nice. We have Marcelo Clora as our keynote. Super excited about that. Took a couple of years to get him. He's the CEO of SoftBank International Group, and Dan Schulman, the CEO of PayPal, will be speaking. We have sovereign wealth funds, showing up. But what really matters is I said to Denmark, I don't care how scrappy the event is virtually this year, meaning, you're not going to go to a fancy event at Hearst Towers and dinners and kickoffs. People just want checks. Who is writing checks? Really, that's all we care about. So we're reverse, producing, if you will, that. And there's lots of family offices that care. We have, I can't say who it is, but we have the chief investment officer, for a billionaire. He's like super excited, a white billionaire, and he's just like, oh, this is amazing. Like, I don't have to get on a plane and go. So we spend, it's a full-time job, culture shifting weekend. Okay. It's like 9 months, 8,000 hours, a team of 10 for each event, per event. But every year we probably have 50% of the room are new people, new family offices, new sovereign wealth, new investors, new venture capitalists, because we want to cast a wide net, and the rest are people that have been before. And so we spend an enormous amount of hours curating, meeting new people, getting introduced. And if you are, white and you run a family office and you're talking about ESG and impact, you will eventually get a call from us to introduce you to this community. And we had a call the other day, with a family office, and it's mostly white, wealthy white families, and they're just super excited to be part of it. People care, but they just don't know where to go, where to place their bets, how to find communities like this, right? We're not taking out billboards on, the what do you call it here in New Jersey, the highways, and we're not taking out ads on TV. And so a little bit of it is, a lot of it is just very grassroots. But being on this podcast with you and giving the opportunity to talk about culture shifting weekend for me and for Denmark and all the people that support this work, now is a time to raise our voice and raise our profile and let people know we exist and the community exists in large numbers. Hiding in plain sight. We want it to be easy to be found. Like you were saying, like, people that should be known should be household names, but they're not. My thing is, I don't want anybody to get written out of a page in the history book again. And whether that's Lonnie Johnson creating the Super Soka, or whether that's, there's a lot of Robert Smith-like people on the rise, right? And could be him. So we want to enable that. And we're super excited to share, the story, and use this podcast to cast a wide net to say, come join us. And you too can be an enabler of success and wealth creation for these communities.
No, I appreciate that, Andrea. Especially I remember going myself and being at that dinner and being like, it's emotionally it touches you. Like you see that community in the same room, and you're like, wow, this is a powerful community that's really passionate about um, really making change in this space.
Yeah, and
Putting
they are like the gas in my tank. Listen, part of it is selfish. I meet amazing people all the time that are part of this community, and I literally feel like my tank gets filled up. I'm not big on sleeping, and so it's incredible how many incredible people there are out there. In fact, one of my mentors, Chris Williams, for what used to be Williams Capital Group, just launched a $250 million fund that Microsoft invested 25 million, the initial seed money in. So, you know, it's now is a really good time to engage, to move the needle, to invest, and to know about these communities.
And can you share a little bit more about? I know it was very moving and in person last year, right? And you're transitioning uh, to a digital environment,
Yeah.
with COVID happening. So what can you share a little bit of because of COVID, what is changing about the event, and what any silver linings from that for you?
Yeah, um, COVID has trimmed the fat, on conversation after conversation, and things go nowhere. People are just like, what is the point? Get to the point. Um, People are coming together in different ways because the world has slowed down. So I think the silver lining in COVID is that, people did not die in vain, or I should say, killed in vain. The healthcare disparities that were illuminated, it's a global conversation now. People are all dealing with the same thing. And so I know I've reconnected with people in a more meaningful way. You can have more meaningful conversations, and people are giving each other permission to do that. Whereas before it was very, if you were doing that, it seemed like you were either weak or, it was a weakness, not a strength. It's actually a strength now. How are you? How's your family? What can I do to be helpful? And just having meaningful conversations where you could just bring your authentic self to the situation. And so I've reconnected even with myself, what really matters and what doesn't. And just leading with that. And so I think that's the silver lining, and my hope and my goal and the effort that I'm putting in along with Denmark and my board is, you know, making sure that this is a page in the history books that was absolutely transformative. So Denmark and I are committed to getting $1 billion in the hands of Black and Latinx founders, entrepreneurs, and venture capitalists. And we plan on doing that through the culture shifting weekends that have now expanded to Miami. So that's the silver lining is, um, just trim the fat, just be, real with people. Um, you should offer to help them as much as have an ask ready for when they say, how can I help you? And be really clear about that. And don't just be, helping others. You also need to be helping yourself and very clear about what it is you're trying to achieve.
Great. Well, on that note, Andrea, thank you for joining us. For everyone watching, this was Rebel One Live. Andrea Hoffman, Culture Shift Labs CEO, and the founder and architect of the Culture Shifting Weekends. So, thank you very much, Andrea,
Thank
for
you,
joining us
Sergio. Keep
tonight.
up the great work that you're doing as well. I see you out there, and I just want you to know that I appreciate all of the effort you put into community and shining a light on all and the important people out there. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate